All right, we are live. Welcome everybody to State of React Ecosystem. So excited to be here today. Let me go ahead and share my live, turn off the feedback, and then share my screen. One second. Okay. Can everyone see the screen? Good. All right.
Yep.
So welcome to State of the React Ecosystem. We're so excited to host this event today. This event is presented by the Stat Media and Vercel. So wanted to quickly give a quick shout out to our sponsors. Lee from Vercel is here. Did you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I just want to thank you all for putting on this event. We're really happy to be here and sponsor and to get this group of people together to talk about everything in the React ecosystem. So thank you.
Yeah, there are just so many exciting things happening. And wanted to give a quick shout out to the Stat Labs, which is the sister company of the Stat Media. We are a 50% JavaScript consultancy. So we love everything JavaScript. And if you need help with anything that you're working on, feel free to let us know. And you can check out this Labs. There's a lot of amazing content. We run React.js meetup, Angular meetup, GraphQL meetup, and Vue meetup as well. So if you're excited about this type of content, get ready because also we have React Contributor Days coming up. This is going to be May 13th, and this is going to be a really amazing event. It's something that we have been doing for, oh my gosh, many years now, probably four or 5 years or so, hosting contributor days for different communities. So this is a really great opportunity, again, to just get 30 to 50 people who are doing cool stuff within React, talking about solutions, and just being able to work together. So it's about 3 hours of doing that. Everyone's invited though. So if you're excited about this and you want to get more involved in the React ecosystem, definitely come hang out. And you can find that on React Meetup. I am one of your co-hosts today, along with Lee, who is a solutions architect and DevRel at Vercel, and then also Hunter, who is a senior software engineer at the Stat Labs. So thanks y'all for co-hosting with me.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
And we have an amazing set of panelists. Lindsay, who's here, she's a software engineer from the Stat Labs. Thanks for joining us, Lindsay.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you as part of the panel conversation. We also have Guillermo, who is the CEO for Vercel. Welcome, Guillermo.
Really excited to be here and chatting all things React.
Yes. And then Brandon, creator of Blitz.js.
Hello. I'm also excited to be here and nerd out with all of you about cool stuff.
And then also Mark, who is a software engineer at Northrop Grumman and also the Redux maintainer, one of them.
Hi, greetings.
We also have David, who's on the core team of Redwood.js.
Hi all. Yes, excited. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Tracy and this dot.
And we also have Sagun or Sage, who is creator of Shocker UI and CareerLift.
Hey everyone, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Additionally, Tanner Lindsley, who's VP of UI UX at Nozzle.io.
Hi everybody, thanks for having me.
Hello. And then also Ian Sutherland, who is the maintainer of Create React App, Node collaborator and principal software engineer at Neo Financial.
Hey, great to be here.
So I love these state of events that we host, and we're going to start off by all of these amazing panelists just giving us an update on the different technologies within the React ecosystem that they're working on. So we actually didn't determine an order. So does anybody want to go first?
I can start talking about Next.js. if that's okay.
Sure.
Cool. So we're really excited about the progress that we made in 2020 to turn Next into a hybrid framework. So for those of you that were familiar with the Next 4 years ago, we started out with the framework around server rendering exclusively, really. And over time, we saw the community was excited about doing static things as well with it. So we introduced the Next export subcommand. So it was kind of like this thing where like you had to go all in on server rendering or all in on static. So what we did is we introduced a granularity on a per page basis, and then customers were able to say, this page is static, this page is server rendered. So that worked out really well. And people throughout the world today are using Next to support a hybrid spectrum of applications and websites where some pages are static, some are dynamic. They can choose, go back and forth depending on their needs, their resources, their costs, how dynamic they are, et cetera, et cetera. So we're doubling down on that moving forward. And with the introduction of React Server Components, at least over Christmas season, a video was dropped describing the future of React by the React team, talking about React Server Components. And that for us was like a huge validation because you have this file in your React app that ends with .server.js. And that means, okay, this is a React Server Components component entry point. We put out also, I don't know if everyone's here seen it, but we put out a demo of what React Server Components looks like on top of Next.js. So it's called next-server-components.vercel.app if you all want to try it out. We also put out a blog post talking about this tech preview and what React Server Components means in the future and what are the advantages and why we're so excited about it. So we're working hard with the Next.js team on adding this new functionality. We're working with the React team. We're testing this out, and it's an exciting new world. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for the update. You guys are just, man, just killing it over there. So we're so excited, and it's really just so amazing to see how inspirational like the work that you all are doing is affecting the rest of the React ecosystem. So super stoked. Who wants to go next?
Okay.
Cool.
So I'll assume that some of you haven't heard about Blitz, what Blitz is, since it's pretty new. So I'll give you a quick overview of what Blitz is. Blitz.js is a full stack framework that is built on top of Next.js and brings everything you need for building full stack apps, everything from the front end to the database. And we bring a lot of integration for tooling like Jest, Prettier, all those sort of things. We build authentication into Blitz. And so, in fact, when you set up a new Blitz app, you will get authentication already set up for you. So you can straight away create a user, sign up, log in, log out, etc. So it's super awesome because you basically don't have to like set up authentication ever again if you're using Blitz. So that's something super exciting to me. But then the really big thing that we do in Blitz is add what we call a zero API data layer. And this abstracts the API layer into a compile step so that when you're building your app, you don't have to mess with REST or GraphQL. It just works. So you can write functions that run on the server that talk to a database or whatever. And then you can import those directly into your components and just use them. And there's no fetch calls or nothing. You just use our use query and use mutation hooks, which are built on top of React query. Thank you, Tanner. And so it's super productive for building that, because it's amazing how much the API layer will slow you down with just the complexity involved there. So 3 weeks ago was our 1-year anniversary of the launch of Blitz, which is awesome. Hooray, Blitz. And we've come so far. We have almost, I think, about 240 total contributors now. And so we have a really awesome community, really vibrant, active community in our Discord, contributors. And so we're always looking for more people to contribute to Blitz. And I'm happy to personally help you get set up contributing. Just this week, I had a call with somebody that was having some issues. And so we got that sorted out. So, and then also on our 3 weeks ago on that 1 year anniversary, we officially launched our beta release. So Blitz is now in beta, and so it's a good time to start building production apps. It's a good time to start evaluating Blitz and start building. We are on the final road to 1.0, which we expect within a month or two, and so that's exciting stuff. The excitement and activity around Blitz is just accelerating so much. It's kind of wild to see. Like there's just more and more people talking about how much they love Blitz, telling other people about it. They're like, hey, you should use this. It's like a game changer. So that's really exciting to see. There are more, in fact, we're seeing more and more people converting Rails and Laravel apps to Blitz, which is kind of wild. Like, I don't know if you should convert your app or not, but there's people doing it. So that's a good sign. And yeah, I think that about wraps up what I have to say now. So I'm excited to hear what everybody else has to say.
I love what you're building, Brandon. You built just such a vibrant community that just everyone's excited about. So whenever people ask me what I'm excited about, I'm like, well, Blitz and Redwood. That's what I'm excited about because that's what I hear everyone talking about these days. Who'd like to go next? Ian? Great.
Yeah, I'll give the Create React app update. So I mean, at a high level, we're staying focused on being the fully client-side option out there and really optimizing around that use case. At the end of last year, we shipped a major release v4 that had fast refresh, support for TypeScript 4, React 17, Web Vitals, as well as some ESLint customization options. And then, yeah, what's coming up next? We're hoping to ship a minor release in the near future with Webpack 5 support. I know a lot of people are waiting for that. And then beyond that, we're starting to focus on what we want to do for the next major release. And so we're starting to work on a new, more modern CLI, and that'll allow us to bring some improvements to the templates that we introduced a while ago, as well as the process and speed of bootstrapping a new project. And we're hoping that'll let us maybe add some new capabilities to our templates. And then, yeah, beyond that, some internal improvements that we're hoping will make it easier for us to maintain the project and make it easier for contributors to get involved, which is something we really need right now. We're really looking for new contributors. And then last but not least, we are also planning to drop support for IE11 in our next major release. So yeah, I think that covers it.
I was totally before this started, we were talking and we're like, we're going to announce that we'll be dropping IE11 support, and I was totally kidding. But Ian, I think that's amazing. And I think that's the trend of a lot of people right now.
It was already on my list. So yeah, I'm excited for that one. Shipping a more modern bundle would be great.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. I think we have two or three other folks left. So who would like to go next?
Yeah, for sure. I can go next.
Great. Awesome.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. So I think for Chakra UI over the past 2 to 3 years, roughly, we've been focused heavily on building UI components that help people ship their websites and apps with speed. So starting all the way from ensuring the components are very accessible, making sure that you are able to style them very easily without ever having to write CSS, thanks to Brent Jackson for releasing Style System a couple of years ago to help us sort of build the foundations of this. I think in the past couple of years, it's been really interesting. And we've seen close to 1.8 million developers out there use Chakra UI, and that is really amazing. And that has actually gotten us to a place of stability since we released V1 4 months ago. So regarding the updates, I think what we are trying to focus on Chakra UI is basically two things. One of them is we are pushing the edge, slightly trying to shift away from style system when it comes to style computation and sort of use or leverage the built-in capabilities of the browser. And what I mean by this is trying to introduce CSS custom properties. So instead of having to do too many style computations ahead of time, which could lead to a little bit of runtime performance issues, we are sort of turning towards like trying to introduce CSS custom properties. And we recently released a minor version of Chakra UI that starts this process. So we're really excited to see where this drives us in the future. Right, so far we've seen that the happy path for CSS in JS has been like a way to sort of leverage the dynamic nature of CSS and JS libraries like style components and emotion, and sort of like merge that with the context-related capabilities of CSS custom properties. So this means we slowly over time move away from context, React context, or theme provider from emotion and start to use or leverage CSS custom properties because they pretty much work the same way. Another thing we are doing as well is to try to, I call this the rise of the machines. And this is basically trying to model our components or all interactive components like the model, accordion, number input, pin input, and literally most interactive components, try to move them over to state charts and model them in such a way that they could be written once and sort of like reused across multiple libraries or frameworks. Because Chakra UI exists for both React and Vue, I think over the past couple of months, we've seen that component logic gets duplicated a lot. And we feel like because we are still in the same JavaScript ecosystem, we could do a lot better by abstracting component logic and states, sort of putting them all together in a single state chart in a way that is like very predictable and easy to track down bugs and sort of improve them over time. So shout out to David Koshid for evangelizing this concept of state machines and making it popular everywhere. I think this really got to me as well. And we are sort of looking to do this, and this is a new direction for components built with Chakra UI going forward. I think lastly, we're also trying to invest heavily in accessibility, making sure that all our components are as accessible as possible, trying to invest in getting core members educated on the foundations of accessibility so that we are sure and we can sort of say with confidence that all our components give you all the styling capabilities, accessibility, and the composability out of the box. So these are the key things we're excited about and we plan to work on for the next 1 year in Chakra UI.
Oh my gosh, that was an amazing update. Thank you so much. Who else do we have? Who didn't go yet?
I can go.
Great.
So I know my title just said nozzle and people are like, what's nozzle? But I actually created React Query. So that's what I'm going to talk about. But really quick updates on React Query. In fact, I'm even just going to share my screen to make things easier on myself.
Yes, let me
possible.
activate that for you. Hold on 1 second.
Okay, yeah. So.
Okay, can you do it now?
There, perfect. Yep. There we go. So quick updates for React Query. The community has just been exploding and it's fantastic. And I'll start with, what Brandon said, but it's starting to become used by other tools like Blitz, which has been awesome to see it integrated into other tools. I love it when that happens in open source. We've seen it span people who are just beginners who have no idea how like use effect works, and never want to learn how it works, which I don't blame them. And I've seen it scale all the way up into, new Fortune 500 companies that are working with me and other contributors to the library to, integrate it into very large ecosystems and products. So it's been really exciting to see React Query grow. It's only been about a year since we released it. And you can kind of see in this little chart here, it's been surprisingly explosive. So this is just GitHub stars, and we've already got more than Apollo client and relay, which I never thought would happen. And it's mainly due to all the amazing contributors that I've had step up to the plate. TK Dodo on GitHub and Nick Bosch. They are just two of the greatest people I've ever worked with. And by no means do they want spotlight, but I'm going to give it to them because they deserve it. But they've really made React Query what it is today. Other great updates. We recently launched a version 3, which brought a bunch of breaking changes, but also brought some great things. Better SSR, especially when you're working with Next.js. It's pretty much our de facto recommendation is to use it with Next.js because we heart Next.js hardcore. Data lagging, which is a pretty cool trick that makes your queries feel like you're using suspense when you're not. We got bidirectional queries and data selectors and just a lot of nice quality of life improvements coming to the API. We also have some unique things happening now with retrying and replaying offline mutations when people reconnect. Some pretty cool features there. And we made the core of React Query agnostic. So now I have people who are working on Vue and Svelte and Angular versions of React Query that use the React Query core, which is pretty cool. That's been really exciting to see unfold. We built in the dev tools right into the library, and that's been really fun. And we're starting to experiment with some plugins that'll let you do some cool stuff like cache persistence. So I feel like this is mostly for developers where you're reloading the page in development. So you don't have to, you can cache your cache in local storage and do some interesting things there, even with React Native and SQLite even. Some people are messing around with that. We also have a cache broadcast plugin, so you can sync your cache across tabs. If you're an app that encourages users to open multiple windows or tabs, we can do that now, so everything syncs across. And that's really it for V3 and updates. This fun little teaser emoji set down here is because we are working on some very, very cool things for the next version of React Query. We're going to be focusing very heavily on normalization, which is something that we have stayed away from for a while because we want to make sure we do it right. And we're going to be diving into some heavier GraphQL integrations in the future as well. Some really exciting things. I've never been more excited about React Query than I have been over the last few weeks. So the future is bright.
Oh my gosh, Tanner, I think you know how to get all of us excited. I was just talking about React Query on a podcast and just talking about how things like this just really change the ecosystem, and inspire other things. So I'm really, really excited to see V3 come about. David, are you last? Save the best for last.
I would love to go last. And also, just to say, there's a lot of Redwood people that love React Query. And
Mark hasn't gone.
I've
Mark
heard
hasn't. So yeah, we can swap that GraphQL client out. So anyway,
Blitz and Redwood heart React
really
Query.
excited. Totally.
Stickers.
Mark, would you like to go, or I'm happy to go? I am talking now.
Oh, sorry, Mark.
I can jump in.
Go for it.
All right, let me, let's see, can I re-enable screen sharing?
Yep, just did. Go ahead. Mark, you're just ever present. So I was like,
Yep.
well, of course Mark has talked already. Sorry.
Hanging out here in the background. All right, so over the last couple of years, we've really redefined what it is to write Redux code. I've taken to calling it modern Redux, and it's really two different things. We introduced a library called Redux Toolkit, which is our official opinionated way to write Redux code. It has a bunch of built-in APIs that simplify most of your common Redux use cases. And we also now have the React Redux Hooks API, which we recommend as a default approach for working with Redux in your React components. And Redux Toolkit, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, includes APIs like Configure Store, which automatically sets up a Redux store with good defaults like the Thunk middleware and the Redux DevTools integration. and create slice, which lets you write reducer functions that can mutate the state inside using immer, and it automatically generates all the action creators and reducers for you. It also has utilities like create async thunk, which can simplify some of the process of doing data fetching and dispatching actions. And we've had an incredibly positive response to all these changes over the last couple of years. I routinely have people pinging me on Twitter and saying, like, I used to really dislike working with Redux, and then I tried Redux Toolkit, and now I love working with it. People popping up on Reddit and responding to others in comments saying, hey, you should really be using Redux Toolkit. And I didn't even have to tell them to say that. So the response has been really, really great. We also updated our tutorials to now actually teach Redux Toolkit as the default way to write Redux logic. So one thing we've been working on over the last few months, even with some of the Redux Toolkit APIs, data fetching is still a bit of a pain. You have to write your thunks, dispatch the actions, handle some loading state, write some reducers, and it still takes a noticeable bit of code. And so we have a couple other maintainers who are working on Redux Toolkit with me, Lenz Weber and Matt Sikowski. And a couple months ago, they decided that they were going to sit down and try to write a better data fetching abstraction for Redux. And so we've put it out for now as a separate library that we're calling RTK Query. And yes, it takes very, very obvious inspiration from React Query and Apollo and Urkel and these other, kind of similar libraries that are focused on abstracting the process of fetching data, managing the caching and the loading state, and making it really, really easy to work with that in your React components. So we've got it as a separate library for now because it's technically still in alpha, and we figured it would be easier to iterate on it as a separate package. But once it's done, we're actually just going to move the new APIs back into Redux Toolkit itself, and it'll be just another one of our APIs that are exported. So it has obvious similarities to React Query and Apollo, but it also takes some slightly different approaches. For example, we have you set up kind of the API definition and the endpoints in more of a central place, but then it automatically generates the correctly typed React hooks for you. And so then you can import those hooks into your components and use them. So similar concepts, some different implementations and approaches. So, we've had some people who have said, it's a little too hard to work with data fetching in Redux, and we think this is going to make that a lot easier to work with for a lot of people. One other thing that I'd like to mention that I've been thinking about lately that actually has nothing to do with Redux at all. So I see a lot of people who are confused about what kinds of tools and processes should they use, because there's so many different options in the React community, like styling. Do I use CSS modules, inline styles, CSS and JS? Should I use Next or CRA or Gatsby? Should I use Redux or MobX or XState? And a lot of this comes down to people don't know what the purpose is for a lot of these tools or why they should consider using them in some way. And so about a week ago, I decided to start doing something about this. And I quickly threw together a skeleton site that I have dubbed the React Community Tools and Practices site. And right now, there's only a couple pages in there that I put together just to get something up. But my goal for this is that this really would be a community effort, if only because I don't have time to write all this stuff myself. But I would like to get experts from the community involved in writing some short pages that say, here's what my tool does, here's the problems it solves, here's when you might want to use it, and here's when you should maybe consider using something else. So as a first proof of concept, I wrote a page that kind of describes what is state management in React. And for Redux specifically, what problems does Redux solve? What are some of the trade-offs involved in using it? And when should you use this, or maybe try using something else? So this is literally just me writing some documentation for a few hours, and I would really, really like to get the rest of the community involved to fill this out. I feel this is an area of information that has really been lacking in the community, and I'd like to kind of have a semi-official React community resource that we can point to, not to say tool X is better than tool Y, but just to tell them, here's what's out there, here's when you might want to consider using this because it solves these problems.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. All right, everyone. Open up a pull request really soon so that we can help Mark kick this off the ground. Thank you,
We need
Mark.
that. We need
Yeah.
that, Mark.
Yeah, really. I'm going to tweet it out right now. All right, David.
All right. Could I share my screen as well?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
All right. Make sure I'm sharing the right thing. I've been known to not do that. Okay. Can you all see that slide? Happy birthday, Redwood.
Yes, we can.
All right. So today, so similar to Brandon and Blitz, similar timeline, we snuck in right at the quarantine deadline, right? So I think COVID was declared a pandemic and Redwood launched on the same day. And those had nothing to do with either. I don't think we had there was no causality. But anyway, 1 year ago today is when we announced Redwood version 0.1, which was really exciting. And talking about the state of React ecosystem, just want to say that the most pleasurable, exciting, fun thing that's happened in the last year has been getting to really experience from this vantage the amazing community of open source, right? So like everyone who's a part of this panel here and all the communities that they represent, everyone behind them, that really is the state of React. So Tracy, thank you for being another gathering place for all of us, but it's really fun. And it's fun to get to participate in this ecosystem. So I don't think everyone knows about Redwood. I want to do a quick little what is Redwood, and I want to talk about where React fits inside of that as well, because as Brandon knows, as Guillermo knows, like thinking about React, it's one piece amongst a whole lot of other pieces, right? So the story of Redwood goes back to Tom Preston Warner, co-founder at GitHub, who also created Jekyll, one of the earliest and most successful at the time, and still to this day, static site generators. Tom wanted to build a modern framework that could do all these things, right? We needed the conventions. He wanted the database management to be easy, modern UI, also modern clients, and everything that's exploded just in the last 5 years with clients. Tom has this thing he likes to call the universal deployment machine. I just want to put it out in the world and it should work. One API for everything, that's a client, and then an end-to-end DX. So the vision was building a framework that would be a code base you could iterate on and optimize over the long term at scale. And bonus points if it made you happy, right? Because it's not just about getting something up and running, although that needs to happen and you need to enjoy doing that. But if the code base is going to grow long term, there's a lot of things that you need to happen. So this is how we think about the state of the React ecosystem and really JavaScript. It's a whole lot of big pieces that are kind of living on their own, right? And React, Netlify, and Vercel, Jest, and Storybook. When we say end-to-end DX, Redwood actually is generating Jest test, Storybook, mocks for you, files as you build your components, so that when you get to the end, you can run a test suite and all of your API tests, because there's a test database in the background, work. And all of your web tests pass. In Storybook, when you fire up Storybook for the first time because you want to do design on components, all of your mocks for all of your states work out of the box. And it turns out, if you integrate all those things, it makes for a really pleasurable experience with a framework, right? And you're like, oh, JavaScript, React, this stuff is really fun, but it's really hard to do the integration, right? And hopefully in some discussion, we can talk about some of the pain points we've experienced, but also some of the really exciting things. So what Redwood is an opinionated, full stack multi-client framework that deploys to the edge if you want. So Netlify and Vercel, or old school, I'm calling AWS EC2's old school now, or bare metal, right? You can ship it in a container as well. This is our update for the last year. We're 1 year in, and it's, yeah, I can't emphasize that mind blown emoji at the bottom. But there's a lot of really exciting things happen. The community has just been wonderful. I made so many friends, and we're having a really great time. And then we get quotes like this from Hamish, who like Redwood is giving them superpowers. And I wanted to draw the contrast mostly on this slide that, right, when you look at standalone React, it's not standalone React that gives you this experience. It's how React plays amongst a whole other set of tools. So for example, a really important Redwood concept that we call a cell. This is one component that does declarative data fetching for you, integrates with GraphQL, and handles all the state: loading, empty, failure, success. And so you have questions about state. Where would I use hooks? See what I did there, right? I was actually thought about that pun for a while. But anyway, you would use your hooks here, right? You think about state here, and you have one place where you can manage all of these ultimately concepts that are in React, and it's really elegant because you have conventions, abstractions, and generators. This is a higher order component, but I would never wish a higher order component on any like sole developer going out and trying to create a higher order component on their own. It's just super complex, but it gives us the power to do something like this. But when you look under the hood, right, what do we have to do with React to be able to use something as elegant as a single component cell? Well, this is what we call the React sausage. Redwood has generators. If you create a database model for a post, imagine a blog post, and then you run the Redwood generators, this is all the code. And notice how many components we have to create just to get a cell working, right? So this is the React sausage that you have to go through that process to get something as elegant as a cell. So anyway, more fun things to talk about. So what do we think about the state of React ecosystem? I hope people know the tick, because this was a favorite from my childhood. But we think that React is a wonderful tool when it lives inside some system, some framework that integrates all the pieces together so that React becomes a part of an end-to-end developer experience. The Redwood tutorial is a wonderful place to get started. If anyone hasn't tried out Redwood so far, redwoodjs.com, the tutorial, and we walk you through all the features of Redwood that you have. The only thing that we don't cover right now is pre-render. There's a great document on that, and we'll be adding that to our tutorial. We have parts 1 and 2, and we take you through all the tools and features as well as the Redwood DX. So you'll learn how to use the test suite, use the storybook suite, and everything you just get along the way as you use Redwood. And lastly, because it wouldn't be me if I didn't talk about stickers, redwoodjs.com stickers, we will send you anywhere you are in the world stickers for free, Redwood stickers. So try us. It really happens. It may take a while, but we would love to send you stickers anywhere in the world. Right after this, we're doing a very special Redwood.js meetup because it's Redwood's birthday. And Tom, Peter, Rob, and myself, we're the co-founders of Redwood. We're just going to spend some time talking. We're going to get nostalgic and talk about what happened before 0.1 release. And then all the things that happened this last year, the exciting things, the hard things, where we wanted to go, where we didn't go, and all the things that's to come. Everyone's invited to that. You can get the link for that on @redwoodjs.com. And I will post these slides on Twitter. So
Thank you
Tracy,
so much.
I don't know how long I talked for. Do I have to do push-ups? For everyone doesn't know,
Yeah,
if I came in under 5 minutes.
5 push-ups because you took 10 minutes.
Did I? No, I didn't. Did I? That's not possible.
But no worries. No worries.
Oh,
Yeah. No, thank
did
you
I
so
really?
much. That was an amazing update.
Thank you all. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you so much.
Okay, we're so excited to kick off the next portion of our State of React ecosystem event. And you know, Hunter and Lee will be kind of co-hosting that with myself. But I know, Lindsay, I was talking to you and I was like, you were like, oh, can I ask questions? So do you have any like burning questions? I know you're part of the panel, but you know, we encourage everyone to have conversations here, even if you're part of the panel, ask questions.
I think I'll hold off my questions for a bit at this point, since they were specific to each tool that was being talked about. But I'm very excited about everything that's going on. I've tried some of the tools, React Query, Redwood, Blitz, And I'm looking forward to continuing trying them out and experimenting them in my own workflows to make my life easier.
Amazing. Thank you. Lee and Hunter, do you guys have any?
I'm good to jump into some of the topics we had considered chatting about, if that's all right with y'all.
Yeah, same.
Perfect. I'll just talk about the first one and kick it off and see where we take it from there. So it's obviously been a little while since hooks had been released. It was a pretty drastic shift in the entire React ecosystem. And I think there's still a little divided on whether it's the benefit or the, I guess, differences in the ergonomics or the consumption of hooks. We have some people who are very ecstatic, over the moon about the composability and reusability. We have some other people who maybe aren't as excited about the API. What is everyone's thoughts on hooks and where they see kind of the future of composability and reusability in React? Just feel free to jump in.
Okay.
Or I can call them.
A few different thoughts.
Marky,
A couple different thoughts and observations. So one thing I think it's been interesting to see how really I think the community adopted hooks more enthusiastically and faster than the React team really expected. The React team did a survey last year, kind of in preparation for trying to rewrite the docs. And I think part of that was asking, do you use mostly hooks, some hooks, mostly classes, etc. And I think I was chatting with Dan a little bit at one point, and he said that the results indicated that at the time of the survey, which was like almost a year ago, like 70% of people were already mostly hooks. And based on his comments, I think that actually took him kind of by surprise. It was kind of like they hoped they would be adopted, but they weren't expecting them to be adopted that quickly. On the other hand, in some ways, we've traded one set of problems for another. So on the one hand, we don't have to worry about what does this point to anymore. I see way fewer questions about this keyword in the React Flux channels. On the other hand, we now have to deal with closures and stale state and having to string together combinations of use effect and use ref in order to do things that feel like they should have been kind of simpler. But we do also get the portability and the cleanup and the consolidated logic and all that. So they're not perfect, but I think they are definitely an improvement overall. But like everything, there's trade-offs.
Yeah, I was in a. Go ahead, Sagan.
Yeah, sure. So I think for me, each time I think about hooks, I think from a library perspective and from a product perspective. So I'll talk about the library perspective pretty quickly. I think so far, I think I've seen like React hooks being like super, super useful when building components and encapsulating a piece of component logic and sort of sharing that between multiple components. So for example, you could have a modal and some drop down. And if you wanted to trap focus, you can put everything in a hook and just like call it use trap focus and then just use that across board, and it works pretty consistently. I think I've seen it's pretty useful for libraries. On the other hand, I've also seen for products that it's kind of very easy to abuse hooks. You could get like as the logic of your components or product gets like more and more complex, it's kind of hard to track down like the different amounts of use effects and use ref and like use state, everything offline all over the place. And for a new engineer that joins a team and you just want to take a look at the code base and then you see hooks everywhere, it starts to feel like black magic happening in the code base, and you're trying to like figure out like the order of hooks and how things happen. So I think I would say like it can be a little bit hard to sort of like understand like what a specific hook does. On the other hand, I think it's really helpful. So it's more like it's very useful to encapsulate logic, but as that logic gets more and more complicated, you start to feel a bit like awkward, like just looking at the code within the hooks. That's it. And I think the second thing would be like over time when I try to teach people who are getting started in React in general, they find it really hard to wrap their heads around like hooks, the whole concept of hooks in general. And I've sort of seen that they kind of tend towards class components because it's kind of easier to know a component did mount, component will amount. And it's kind of easier to wrap your hand around those life cycles. But then as you move towards hooks, and then you start to like get them to shift their minds away from these life cycles to sort of like side effects and syncing the state of the component with the state of the world. And they're like, what the heck is the state of the world? Like, how do I even understand what that means? And how do I understand what this effect does? So I found that it's not exactly, so far, I don't think hooks is like entirely like beginner friendly for someone who wants to jump in to use hooks. But I'm definitely, I see the need and I see the usefulness over the years since it's been launched. But I think that maybe a bit more education could be done to help people really, really understand the concept behind hooks.
And I think one key thing about that, so if you look at the React doc site right now, all the tutorials still teach class components as the default. And I've seen people be very, very critical of the React team for not having updated the docs yet. Some people said they should have rewritten the docs on day one, and I think that would have been too early. But the good news is the React team is actively working on a complete rewrite from scratch of the entire React doc site. And they're not only going to be teaching hooks and function components as the default, the intent is to have like a lot more of like a coherent thinking in React kind of a mind frame. And I know I've seen, like if you follow like Rachel Neighbors on Twitter, she's been doing a lot of that work. And she seems to be very, very happy with the direction that the new docs are going. So hopefully that will be launched in the hopefully not too distant future. Like I don't have a date. I'm just saying I want to see them soon. And I think hopefully that will help with the learning process.
I love what Siglin said about, oh, sorry, Tanner.
After G, you can go first.
Oh no, I was gonna say, I really love that mental framework of library author and product developer. And I think the success of hooks is that it's almost biased towards the library developer, but every product developer that I've met goes into library territory often, right? Like we all have, or I'm speaking for everyone, but a lot of companies, we all have our design systems, our internal libraries, our hooks on top of hooks. So when you think about the global maxima for a product developer, sometimes it looks like templates and bidirectional binding. And when you go too far in that direction, you sacrifice that composability or library author thinking that we all have inside of us, even when we're working on a product. So I really enjoyed that framework to discuss trade-offs between the tools or how complex React is. And it's nice that it's a balance between those two worlds.
That's great. And I was going to say, I feel like it's a classic pendulum between exposing more power, right? I think what Guillermo said is totally true. It was a move towards the library developer side of us. Everybody has that side. And it definitely exposed more power more easily to people than the old syntax and the old API did. And I know as a library developer, I jumped to the ceiling when they announced hooks because of the new things I was going to be able to do so much easier. And I mean, like React Query literally was almost born because of hooks coming out, you know, but I do know that that's not how everybody feels. And it's definitely, you can easily develop a bias like I have that hooks are amazing and that they're easy. But really that's not the case for everybody in the beginner stage. And so again, I think that pendulum is just going to keep moving. You know, we've seen it move towards library users and advanced use cases and power. And I think even the ecosystem as a whole, all of us here, we know that, and that's why we're trying to harness all of that power into, you know, the libraries that we create and maintain. I've heard people say, yay, React Query, I don't have to use effect anymore. And I'm like, oh, you should totally understand how to use effect, but I understand your pain, you know? So it's just a pendulum. It moves back and forth. And I think definitely with React, we as maintainers of products in the ecosystem are very responsible for the movement of that pendulum. And I like where things are going.
I think as a developer who works more on the product side than the library side, I'm a fan of hooks, primarily because it simplifies as I'm approaching an application in React, what I need to think about. I'm primarily a Vue developer. And in Vue, we always have just the single file component. If I need a component, I make a single file component. In React, prior to hooks, there was the class-based and the function-based, depending on what I wanted to do. And at this point, I just need to create a function component. That's the process to do it. And then, like you were saying, Tanner, there's the libraries that are built on top of this power that provide all the functionality that a typical application is going to need, like React Query or Apollo or one of those other libraries. And then I can just leverage the existing custom hooks that were built on top of React to build my application. And yes, I do need to understand how use effect worked and use state and use ref, all of those things. But just approaching the application, I know that I have my hooks that have some logic in them, and I have my function components where the rendering actually happens, and I use my CSS and JS, or I use the hooks themselves. I think just approaching how to build an application, it makes things a lot simpler in the end.
Yeah, and that echoes what we see in people building products with Redwood. So a little bit higher level, because we're talking about state, I have to quote Tom here, who said, state is the grossest thing about React, right? It's really hard. And the way that these problems keep getting solved when you bump into the fundamentals of React is that you keep adding complexity and options. So, right, you have this, do I solve complex things with more complex options? You get the decision overhead. And as framework developers, we actually don't see, like, we wouldn't be the same without hooks, and cells wouldn't be the same without hooks. And I don't get questions in our forums about hooks. I just see hooks being used. I don't see many class components anymore because conventions and abstraction and the patterns exist. People start using those patterns and you start seeing them repeated over and over again. So hooks have been a boon for Redwood, and I've seen the natural progress and shift over in the products that are being built. So it's interesting. State is still hard, but when you take away the complex part and hide that away and provide the abstractions and the conventions, it is really powerful.
So I just wanted to say, like,
oh,
go ahead, Brandon.
Sorry, my connection was glitching there. So that was funny, Lindsay, you brought up about having to decide between a class and a function component, because I totally forgot about that. And then having to convert a function component to a class component, and wow, that's so great to not have to worry about that.
I haven't done that in so long, right?
Yeah.
I don't know last time I used a class component.
It's great. So last night I was in a Clubhouse room with Pete Hunt and some other ex-Facebook people, and they were kind of talking about this very topic. And I thought it was very interesting that they basically described it as use effect is an algebraic effect, and it's how React has implemented it is a workaround for algebraic effects not being built into JavaScript itself. And so that's kind of why we have these kind of frustrations and issues and these little things that are hard, is because it's not built into JavaScript itself. So, but it's kind of that kind of helps me think about it as okay, they've done a really good job at implementing this within the constraints. It's not perfect, but let's see if we can, go farther and bake it into the language.
I think an honorable mention too, while we're talking about state, is how much more valuable I've seen libraries like XState and the concepts around state machines become. David, I said state machine, and I swear David Khurshid's going to pop up in a little video box here. I love that guy, but he deserves a lot of credit for kind of normalizing state machines. And I think in the future, we're going to see a lot more of that because of the difficult nature of understanding the algebraic effects and, how we're working around them in React. The state machine approach while it may be overkill for a lot of things that we do, when you do want to get into really difficult situations with state and React, I think that's something that definitely deserves a mention of a unique and awesome way to handle complex state. So.
Maybe I'll float this next one over to Hunter to transition to, because it actually transitioned pretty well.
That's what I was gonna say. So I just want to say, like, first of all, thank you all for like the responses that you gave, because pretty much was along my thinking as far as like, you know, we need more education, and there definitely is that like product library split like y'all were talking about, which leads into our next question, which is React is kind of this like open and loose. It's more of a library situation. You know, it's like we get a lot of power, like Tanner mentioned, and so we have all these frameworks that have come out, and I feel like there's maybe something missing in between kind of bottom raw React and maybe like something like Redwood and Blitz.js. Do any of you feel the same way? You know, is there a middle?
I think Next.js is that middle.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I can agree with that. That's the first thing that popped into my mind too, is Next.js. That
and I would say it's by design.
I still feel like I'm free when I'm using Next. You know what I mean? I still feel like I'm free to do whatever I would do with a raw React implementation, but there's so many awesome tools that are still composable inside of Next that just make building really anything amazing. So
one thing there too that I think is interesting to highlight is Next has a few opinions. It tries to be pretty opinionless and just provide an extra layer of addition in building React apps. But there are a few opinions, like having the pages folder or source pages or things like that. And I think a common thing I see is people wanting to extend those and have more flexibility on naming conventions or things like that. But I think another thing to consider for folks who want to do that is that there is value in having those opinions sometimes when you jump into a new repo somewhere and you automatically know where things are located. So there's always trade-offs to that approach as well too. Being a framework, I mean, I have a lot of respect for the Next team and the work that they do, because it's a tough job for all the framework people here.
Yeah, I was gonna add too that React is a very long-term project, right? Like we talk about how exciting a lot of the implications of React are. And I think you have to really bet over the React abstraction being the primary one, and a lot of the solutions being rooted in the React abstraction over the long term. That's the path that Next has taken, because before we open sourced it, we had internal prototypes that actually overemphasized certain aspects of ease of use. Like there was a templating language on top and it looked more like Svelte today or Vue. And we realized later on that React would find its way to that eventually. I think hooks is just, as we've just talked about, one stepping stone in that direction. I think hooks are almost like a language primitive at this point, right? So you can believe that React will continue to evolve and get easier and better and more composable. And the framework has to do a really good job at not getting in the way and introducing sort of like a divergence from where React could have gone. And it requires a lot of patience too, and providing solutions that are intermediate and then can sort of complement the React way that is coming. I think that's the trickiest part, but it's super rewarding.
Really quick, somebody brought up the conversation happening in YouTube, and David Wells had an awesome comment that React Queries agnostic core is moving away from hooks. And I think that is like he said, a very telling sign, And I can tell you also with React Table, the next version I'm working on, a lot of the core logic is not built inside of hooks in React. And kind of like Guillermo said, the hooks language provides the interface for making this logic and these features work seamlessly with React, not necessarily building them from scratch in a lot of cases. I just thought that was an awesome observation by David in the chat there.
I was just going to add that I like to hope that Create React App fills a little bit of this void as well. We try to be basically the most minimal kind of wrapper on top of React that can get you started with an app. So I kind of see it as like raw React, then maybe Create React App, and then Next.js is kind of the next level on top of that.
Absolutely.
I did think it was interesting, the bit there about trying to avoid divergence with where the React team is taking React. And I think one thing that has made that a bit difficult is the fact that suspense and concurrent mode are still sort of kind of vaporware right now. I mean, they exist. They're in use at Facebook. You can play with them in the experimental builds, but it's still not clear when they'll be done, what the final APIs will be like, and what some of the final constraints will be on us as library developers. And we actually got bit by that a little bit with React Redux version 6. I kind of tried to get ahead of the curve and come up with a new implementation that would use context for passing down the Redux state to try to avoid potential conflicts with suspense and concurrent mode. Turns out context wasn't ready for that kind of thing, and I had to give up and switch back to another implementation. Well, within the last couple months, Andrew Clark actually put up a pull request for the first potential implementation of a use context selector feature. One of the big complaints about context is that you can't look to see if just a piece of a value has changed. If your component reads that context, you will always re-render, even if you only care about a nested field. And so, like, this has been a really, really requested feature. And now Andrew is starting to do something with that. Maybe that's something we could leverage in React Redux down the road in whatever form it comes out. But the problem is that a lot of this stuff is still, I'm going to say it, it's not a deliberate pun, but it's still in flux. Like, suspense isn't done. Server components are just a demo. Concurrent mode doesn't have a release date. We see these things, they look really interesting. I think they're going to radically transform how we write React, applications and libraries. But it's a little hard as a library maintainer to look at it and see, well, I think this is where we're going to end up, but it's not clear when we're going to get there, and it's not clear what the final APIs and constraints are going to be. And I'm not blaming the React team for taking a while to do this. It's clear that they're thinking very deeply about problems that most of us haven't even considered yet. But it does make it a little difficult from this end.
What I'll add to that too is that we have to expect substantiations of any of these ideas or APIs or whatever in great product experiences and great performance outcomes. Or I think the measuring bar always has to be the product that comes out on the other side. And that's why I'm super optimistic about everything that React team is doing, because I know that they validated internally a lot and they think about product very deeply. But at the same time, it's important that, hey, like, this is an app that's been created with these tools, this set of tools, this set of libraries from the ecosystem. And this is one that's been created with these new approaches, like concurrent, suspense, React server components, and then analyze them from a product experience standpoint, not from abstraction, best practices, algebraic effects, like all these fancy things. At the end of the day, it really all comes down to the product outcomes and experiences.
I mean, absolutely. So this is why I'm trying. I just don't have the framework for the in-betweens, right? Hunter, I loved your question. Like the beginning, we have the pieces of
Thanks.
React over here, and over here we have the framework. But like the in-between state, I would argue that Next is more on the framework side. But so this was my slide in the Redwood presentation. It's like, well, where am I trying to go? I actually never wanted to learn React. That wasn't my goal. I wanted to build a product. And React was a wonderful tool to get the kind of UI and user experience that I wanted to create. React is not the only game in town anymore. And when you start someone off on a learning journey, which we've had to do a lot, like that's the other side of a framework, is you have to help people learn how to use the framework. And there's a lot of art to that. And every step of the way, you have to point to a next step. And so the problem, and Ian, I fired up Create React App so many times. It was the model of so many things that we did. But I would never tell someone to start a project on Create React App because they're going to want to do something next. Because a thing that you build is not the UI alone. And as soon as you have to add that next thing, it is so damn hard. And that's the state of the JavaScript ecosystem. So if you want to think about where should React go? Well, one, it has really wonderful alternatives now because the whole ecosystem has matured, right? So if you start eking out incremental performance or start looking at like, how do we, do better than Vue with this kind of thing? I just don't think that's the right path. I think it's how do you get people started with React, but surround them with all the other things they need infrastructurally so that they can continue that journey to build the thing they want to build and not just build the UI.
I just want to echo.
I think, like you said, I was going to say, David, you mentioned, Rails and kind of these other older traditional frameworks. And I mean, that's why they succeeded so well for so long, is because they had all
and
those
it's still the
steps laid
benchmark,
out. And
right? Like the benchmark framework
absolutely.
experience is Rails, although we don't want to be Rails, but Rails influenced so many things that we did. Right. But it was because you got superpowers, and you got superpowers because like you could do the things you wanted to do, and then you learned what you needed to do along the way.
Yep.
I just wanted to echo what David was saying there. Like, I also would not advise someone who was building a customer-facing product to do that with Create React App. We use React at Neo, where I work, and for our production apps and customer-facing apps, we use Next.js. I still think Create React App is great and fills a lot of use cases, whether it's like prototyping quickly or building an internal tool or something that just needs to be really simple. But I agree, we try not to be that for people, that production app platform. And if people, oftentimes when people do start to outgrow it, that the question that comes up is, hey, how do I do server-side rendering? And our official response to that is you should use Next.js.
I think one thing could be helpful to frame the discussion, or for example, to determine, is this tool easy? I think the answer is for whom, and it depends. And I think one good way to frame it is, what is the output of creation? So if I sit down with Create React App, and I know that my output has to be a single page app and not a full stack app, and perhaps the constraint is embedding it in Electron, and I really, really, really need full control over every piece of state and the router and everything else, then Create React App is the easiest. Same if another way of framing this is, what if my output of creation is a component that I have to publish on NPM? Then the easiest will be some level lower, whether it's tools like TSDX, Microbundle, things that are more tailored to that output of creation. And I think for Next, we found the sweet spot of like what we would call like front end plus. It's front end, and there's this other accessory tools that could go more into like a little bit of the back end. But that's the output of that for the vast majority of customers and users that are choosing it. And then if you go higher up the second, my output of creation is the entire product, the entire app, backend, database, schemas, everything included. And I roll everything sort of myself in the sense of like, I'm responsible for all of that myself. Then obviously Blitz and Redwood are taking that spot. So I think it really depends, because like nowadays we build products in teams. The teams take different responsibilities, or we reuse and sort of get backends off the shelf. So it really depends, I think, what's the easiest tool or what's the most adequate tool in terms of what that output of creation is.
I think that ties in really well too with what Mark was talking about, the new website that he's working on that kind of can help people make some of these decisions. Like you might want to consider create React app if you're trying to build X, but not Y. In that case, maybe you want to consider Next.js or one of these other frameworks like Redwood. I think that's actually a really valuable resource so that people can think about it in that context. What am I trying to build? And then what is the simplest tool that will let me achieve that?
And I believe Lee actually put together a page on his own blog where he was discussing some of the trade-offs and the use cases for Next and CRA. And I think he listed at least one other tool on there. And I actually really liked the format and the material you had on there. And that is the kind of advice and information that I would like the community to come together and put into this site.
Yeah, for sure. I think in making those, I made one like that. I made one on React State too. The further you deep dive, you find there's always a trade-off. There's always something that needs to be listed on the cons section. And the more you understand, you have to really learn a lot about all the different options to give that accurate comparison. I think that's why like comparison tables are so hard, because even if you're an expert in your own space, you kind of have to also understand the other spaces really well too. So yeah, I think that would be a great resource for sure.
Oh, look, my product gets all the green check marks.
Yeah, it's tough.
Guillermo, I think you brought up a really good point about keeping in mind kind of the target of creation. Do you think that there's room for another Next.js for maybe a different target?
I mean, there's always room. So I always say that, like I always think of React. I've been saying this sort of to explain the value of React in my mind. I've said that to me, it's like the discovery of the atomic model. Like, how do we think about the world? I tend to think that thinking in terms of React helps me model a huge spectrum of problems. That's why I've been talking about React as a runtime almost, right? Like when I think of use something, I almost think of use as a keyword in the React language, right? And that's why it's been, to me, the ship sailed in the direction of the React runtime when React hooks came out, and when it came attached to a linting plugin, it was like, oh wow, it's like there's rules, just like a language has rules, right? And I think if we look at the survey that says that people love them, I think we're all collectively all in on this idea of like React is this powerful language that we use. So I think on top of that, you can build infinite things, literally. Like we see it every day, like React for 3D, React for CLI, React for video creation. I saw recently, I thought it was so awesome because at Vercel, we create a lot of videos to explain concepts, to launch new products. And we always come back to like, well, how awesome would it be if a video had a component model too? Or animations. I remember one of our first open source libraries was React keyframes, which we used to do a little animation of a terminal on a website. So I think there's infinite opportunity in the React space. Again, we're committed in Next.js to be like that sweet spot of a slightly opinionated layer on top of React as an engine. But yeah, React is going to be everywhere. I think what's really interesting too is that I think to Redwood's presentation's point, they said you deploy this to the edge. I think the global computation model is changing too. And this is when we depart the Rails world, we think about Rails used to be deployed to Heroku, one location, one, maybe you add a CDN on top later. But I think that's changing too, because the clouds, the serverless computation model, putting React at the edge, putting React next to your database, putting React on the client, that's what I personally get really excited about. So those are the kind of innovations that are going to be coming to the space.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually perfectly iterated a question that I cut out,
Oh, nice.
which was, React as something greater than just the web, which is really awesome. I'm glad
Totally.
that you hit on that.
I think that also, I'd love to get your all opinions on this. So Ryan on the YouTube chat says, it's interesting to see the focus on frameworks again. React was born out of a time that the speed of iteration of most frameworks tied to their opinionated weight was seen as a detriment. I view it as evolution, but it is funny how our ecosystems just continuously like evolve and start over and go back to concepts and decide that they're not whatever anymore. What are your guys' thoughts on Ryan's comment?
So it's kind of a common cycle, like not just in developer, but like in all of tech. And this isn't original with me, but it's a cycle of bundling and unbundling, and it's just kind of a continuous cycle. So you have things that are bundled, like all in one thing, and then people, kind of reach the limits of it or whatever, and so they start unbundling it and piecing it off. And so it could be like, different APIs, like individual business, like just focuses on one thing. But then people get tired of patching together everything, and so it comes back around the companies that like build more inclusive things. And so it happens in JavaScript too. So like React was kind of that unbundling. It's just the view in your MVC, right? I think is what their kind of original tagline was. And so, yeah, now it's back in that bundling the spectrum for React.
And I kind of see that pattern.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, David.
Oh, you go.
Okay, we can see that pattern in hardware as well, right? With Apple releasing the M1 processor that's now bundling everything into a single computer, where before the strength was having multiple components that you brought together. So I think what you're saying, Brandon, is 100%. We're now seeing everything kind of come together in things like Blitz, like Redwood, where you're putting it all in a single box, and you can achieve things that weren't possible before, even though the parts themselves may not have changed.
And so what's the thing that's driving the bundling and unbundling, right? Like that's the question. Can you predict that? Can you think about the cause and effect? And I think it's user demand, right? So there are things that happen that make the end users, the consumers, that could be library builders, but it could be someone on the latest iPhone or iPad, right? We have all these devices that can do more things and they start wanting more. So it's a performance requirement. So when the bundling happens, it's typically when the end users, library builders are like, I'm good. This is good enough. Like, I just want things to be together now, right? But then some things change and they want to do more. They have opportunities to do more and they can't, right? Because the current, the current container is boxing things in. So you unbundle it because you need to get different performance out of things. And then you unbundle it to tweak that up. And I really do think we're at a scenario now where a lot of the things we're talking about that React does, which is UI and user performance across a lot of different clients, like we're good enough. And we're going to keep trying to get incremental performance out of things and tweak things and end up with more complexity. But I'm not sure that means that it's actually adding value to what people want, right? And so that's hard. It's hard to see that looking forward, like where's the good enough line? But I really do think we have to keep paying attention to what really is good enough. And when we hit good enough, go work on some other things.
Yeah, I think the product experience is that thing too that determines the unbundling. Because if you go back to the genesis story of React, and they had everything bundled into a PHP monolith that was streaming HTML with CSS, with references to bundles of JS, like they called it Big Pipe. And then they realized that they had no way to coordinate state. So Redux is, in my mind, very tied into that original need for making sense of a front end that's receiving data updates all over the place. And
remember
notifications
Ajax, right? Like the things we had to do to get, like, I love never talking about Ajax again. Sorry, Guillermo, please.
Yeah,
go ahead.
no, totally.
But, like,
and,
those were the,
but that's,
it was
that's
hard.
exactly the product requirement. It was like, let's do more on the client. Let's do Ajax. So we're only updating this thing really quickly. Let's get, I don't know what the driving function was at that point, but let's get comments on a newsfeed thing faster. And then they were like, okay, let's unbundle. PHP only is not good enough. We need this new way to organize this client-side interaction experience. And then I think to your point about like it's good enough, then they were like, oh, this is really powerful. This works really well. We have to bundle it because now Facebook.com itself can be all a gigantic React component with React subcomponents. And now that's making them realize that React has to bundle more functionality. And so that leads them to React server components. I really like this mental model, Brandon, of bundling and unbundling and how that relates to like product requirements and user experiences and how that ends up dictating that, I think, because, you know, developers will always try to solve hard user problems or business problems at the end of the day.
Great point. I think the other great thing about just, you know, this idea of building on top of React and solving more problems is, again, just the, you know, everybody on this panel, like the innovation that we see building on top of something that basically has become status quo, right? So that's really cool evolution. I feel like I talked to a lot of people in 2020 and they were just bored. Wait, like, what's the next thing that's coming out? What can I even get excited about? And, you know, this panel is really like, oh my gosh, you know, kind of reinvigorates, you know, the innovation happening within the industry. So we are basically out of time. I know, Lee, you had a quick last announcement or comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, first off, thanks to everybody for joining. This is really fun to chat about. And secondly, just doing my due diligence, I have to give my biased plug for Vercel. Obviously, I'm biased, but if you haven't checked it out, it's a really easy way to deploy your React or Next.js site and take that from your personal site all the way up to really large sites and companies. So check it out. Feel free to shoot me a message on Twitter if you have any questions.
I also really love Vercel and how you guys are building the company. So shout out to Lee and Guillermo and everyone else, because, you know, y'all have done some amazing things when it comes to getting investor funding, and you guys are a bigger company now, right? But you're really able to keep like the, you know, keep it real with the community, which is really cool. And I feel like you're a really great example of some of these other companies kind of providing developer tooling on, you know, what they should do and how they should be within the community. So thank you so much for that too.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. And last announcement from my side of Thought Labs. We've been hiring like crazy. It's so much fun. I feel like a new person joins literally every single week. But we are hiring 2 React Native developers, 2 React developers, and 1 Angular developer. So if you're, you know, interested in switching jobs and hanging out, like, and want to be part of like a really fast-paced, you know, consultancy slash, you know, I feel like we're almost operate as a startup sometimes. Yeah, come hang out with us. All right. Well, thank you everyone, again, panelists, for joining and spending time with us. We really appreciate it. And, you know, you can follow all these folks on Twitter too. So definitely don't let the conversation stop here. And React Contributor Days, again, sponsored by Vercel in May, is coming up. So if you go to reactjsmeetup.com, you can check that out and register. And we hope to see you all then.